universe does not understand English, French, and Spanish, only understands vibration. Fifth dimension. That's where we're going. There's something called the fourth ray of creation. The creator gods, little g, the archangelics, began to create without the light of the creator. In 1987, there was something called the harmonic convergence. But the real piece was 2012. When it came, Metatron stepped forth and basically said there will never be another child born until the third dimension. You realign the sixth chakra, the seventh chakra, and the pineal center into something called the Eye of Horus to see into other realms of consciousness. You hear people talking about third dimension, fifth dimension. What happened to the fourth dimension? Cycles. And this cycle we've been in for a long time. And many times cycles overlap cycles. And we're at one of those points where we've got 27,000 year cycles, 12,000 year cycles, 80 year cycles. They're all coexisting right in this one point. And one of the things that is really clear, an experience that we've been playing has come to an end. The experience of being separated from the creator has come to an end. And meaning that energy that we create for ourselves when we say simple things like, I am angry, I am upset, I am jealous, I am resentful. See, the minute you say, I am lack, I'm angry, I'm resentful, you literally disconnect from love. And you basically move away from love. And everybody knows this feeling because the heart, and we'll talk about this, thoughts are electrical, emotions are magnetic. Very important piece of information. But what happens is the minute you move away from joy, excitement, passion, friendship, all of those things that bring about a smile, you push love out of the heart center. The heart and the thought begins to close down. And you say, I'm really angry. And you amplify the emotion. See, love, joy, peace, wonderfulness, you, my friend, I like you. It's a smooth, harmonic flow. And so a lot of times, in simple terms, we get pushed out. But this ability to continue to be, I am angry, jealous, is actually coming to an end. So have you ever played a game and you didn't know the rules? And at the beginning, you might be somewhat lucky and you might have some success, but in the game, you begin to fall apart. You begin to not accomplish what you set out to do. And see, in this game that we're playing, this game of third dimension, it is useful to understand that dimensions are kind of stratas. So what is the difference between 3D and 5D? So let's do this. So in this 3D game, some of the rules are things that you don't even pay attention to. Linear time, one of the most conditional structures that we experience. And you say to people, look at your watch, is there any difference in time? 90% of the people, 99% of people will say, oh no, this is time. So let's deal with linear time. Linear time first is this construction that basically we all have lived by in third dimension. And that is, you have a belief that what is time? Past, present, future, then you die. Anybody want to argue with that? That linearness plays out in one truth in particular. You believe that the past is fixed. You can't change the past. Well, past happened. I had this experience. Time's moved on. I can't change it. That is incorrect. The past is very changeable, but not from the standpoint of, let me wave my magic wand and the event goes away. Other pieces we'll talk about in a second. There's circular time. There's simultaneous time. There's something that doesn't have a good label, but we're going to call it the fourth aspect of time. We'll touch on that as we go on. And then there's an aspect of present time that is unexplainable because the rational mind only knows what it knows, and it doesn't know what it doesn't know, and it has a tendency to argue for its belief system. So, third dimension, linear time. Third dimension is conditional, rightfully so. Do you know the rules of the game? Conditionality. Another big piece is duality. Right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't. We live our lives in those judgments, opinions, responses. Those are some of the aspects of the rules. And then there's another big piece of the game that is mom, dad, teacher, minister. Right? Mom, dad, teacher, minister. Now let's start with saying they love you and they all have your best interest in mind. Nobody's out trying to do it to you. So let's remove that. But what we do is we come into the body and we give up seniority immediately because we're playing a new game and mom, dad, teacher, minister have the answers. But what we've learned to do is basically they say, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. We talk to those, we don't talk to these. We eat this kind of food, we don't eat that kind of food. We go to these schools, we hang out with those. And pretty soon what we do is we basically do what they say. And so it's like, I have your best interests in mind, do what I say. And so we as little beings basically came here to play the game. So we immediately begin to give up seniority. This passion is, it's like, wow, they are so amazing. But then come back at 2 years old, come back at 3 years old. And that glint, that passion, that deepness has been dulled out. And we basically say, mom, dad, teacher, minister know what they're doing. And so we're going to follow them. We begin to follow the rules and structures that have been provided for us. And quite often, we move away from that internal guidance system that sits right in the heart. That space where somewhere in your life, everybody said, let's do this. And something right here went, I don't think so. This doesn't feel right. And if you went and did it, afterwards you said, that was so stupid. I knew I should not have done that. And the flip side of that is you stand on the edge of a cliff and you say, I've got to jump, I've got to fly. And everybody goes, no, you're going to crash. And if you listen to them, you simply give up your passion and step back. The vibration is identical. Excitement and fear is an identical vibration. One steps forward into joy, passion, opportunity, excitement. The other steps back into uncertainty, doubt, and concern and fear. Identical vibration. One says yes, and the other goes, no, I can't do that. And so there's a whole process where we start to, as little kids, go to follow our passion, and then we get told, no, don't, stop making up those stories, stop lying, stop. And a lot of that is all of those psychic abilities, those spiritual abilities that we all have, which is kind of, we could run out a list of about 18 of them, not one or two. But what happens is stop making up those stories. There's no angel sitting at the table where you're playing tea. Time to grow up. And then we give up our blanket, we give up our little doll, and we begin to do. And quite often that experience doesn't feel good, but I have to do, I don't want to upset or get in trouble. And so you begin to condition, there's that word, conditionality, yourself to others. And this is in a way where that don't put false idols in front of yourself. Well, wait, we're talking about mom, dad, teacher, minister. They love me. But their truth may not be, and very likely is not exactly. Their path is not your path. Now, this is a fabulous game that we've been playing, but we get so consumed with, I'm not okay, I don't deserve, I'm not doing it right, I'm stupid. We wind up collecting a lot of judgments because we have tried to follow our joy at some point and got told no. Don't do that. That's wrong. What's wrong with you? We've gotten scolded. We've gotten punished. We've gotten hit. And all of a sudden we bring ourselves into an agreement, a huge word, a major word, agreement. I'm going to be in agreement with the rules and games of the third dimension. The other one is, if you want to succeed, you have to go there. You have to follow the rules. You have to do this right. You have to fit in. You have to ask for permission.
Ah, that one.
See, there's that
So
word
bad.
permission is one of your most powerful tools, but we give up seniority to everybody else's permission. That you should be embarrassed. You should be guilty. How dare you do that? Shame on you. Oh my gosh. All those words start to come into the game. Does that sound like love?
Back then, it took a very long time to get a diagnosis. And when you finally got a diagnosis, it was a death sentence. It was labeled as severe autism, completely non-speaking. And they tell you that there is no hope.
Katie lived through years of loneliness and turbulence and hopelessness.
He seemed tortured. And yet there would be these moments where you would see him finding delight, like the movie Flubber. He would put his hands on his belly and throw himself back and laugh. And I'm like, you can't have that much joy and not be in there, as they told me. And yet every year there's a whole nother set of psychology tests and exams and evaluations to reinforce that if you haven't already given up, you need to.
And beyond the logistical frustrations that Katie felt navigating Houston's diagnosis, everything was compounded by a shrinking social reality.
It's so isolating because we have to essentially live our lives in a way where we don't bother other people. And it's not just you, it's all your kids are living this outcast life. You're not included in any part of society, not in school, not in church, not out in the community, even in the grocery store, you're a nuisance. There's nowhere for you to go. It took me a very long time to give up hope. A part of me breaks inside to give up.
And though it broke her to her core to do it, she gave up on Houston. But what happened next is profound. Houston did not let her.
Houston was 17 years old. I was working 3 jobs at the time, and I came home the night before Thanksgiving, and I was so tired that my body was literally vibrating. And I was laying there, and I just wanted to nap. Houston came downstairs and sat at my feet, which he had never done before in his life. And he sat there completely still. And this is someone who's in literally 24 hours a day motion. And then all of a sudden he reached over and very intentionally tugged at the blanket, just like you would to get someone's attention. And he said, "Mama." And I was shocked because I had never, ever heard my son say my name. He was 17. And I opened my eyes and he was looking directly into my eyes, which he had also never done. And he said, "I love you." I was speechless. And so I was essentially given this opportunity. I could keep not believing that there was any hope, or I could believe in a miracle.
Researching radio waves one night, I stumbled across this amazing story.
I had some dental work to be done. You know, they put in temporary fillings.
This is beloved starlet Lucille Ball sharing a story from around the time of World War II, when she had to get several temporary fillings put in the upper and lower parts of her mouth.
This particular night was about 1:15, and I was driving alone, and all of a sudden, I heard music. And I looked down to turn off my radio, and it wasn't on. I turned around and looked to see if there's anyone behind me, and the music was getting louder and louder and louder, and I realized it was in my mouth. And it was beating in my ears. Yeah, I could hear the tune and everything. I recognized the tune. And then it started to fade out. So the next day I mentioned it at the studio to Buster Keaton. And he said, what street were you on, Moore Park? And I said, yes. He said, you went by the radio station. You picked it up. Well, you got any fillings? I said, yes. He said, you picked it up in your teeth.
Though she tried to hear the music again over the next few nights, she never did. However, about 5 nights later,
I was going up another street. I heard, and I'm picking it up with my teeth. And I backed the car up, and it got stronger and stronger, and I kept on backing it up until it really got strong, and my whole jaw was vibrating.
She had picked up a Morse code transmission from an underground Japanese station.
Honest to God.
And Lucille Ball wasn't the only person who claimed this had happened to them. In fact, there's many accounts out there. Andrea Puharich, a researcher, medical inventor, and physician who was studying ESP in the mid-1900s, found a man who had been admitted to a psychiatric ward for hearing voices.
That Babe Ruth meant to it. The way a newspaper man approached.
The man had worked in a machine shop. When they analyzed his metal fillings, they were coated with carborundum dust, a semiconductor. He was picking up radio signals. The man's teeth were cleaned, and the voices stopped. These stories simply suggest that under the right conditions, our brain can act as a receiver of radio signals, which leads the curious among us to wonder, well, what else can the brain do?
Well, as you know, there have been many studies on the effects of meditation. The first set of studies in the 1970s by Herbert Benson at Harvard and John Kabat-Zinn in Massachusetts, also in Massachusetts, were looking at the physiological responses, and Herbert Benson concentrated to start with on the relaxation response, the way in which meditation reduces stress. I don't know whether this morning you dealt with the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system aspect of this. No. Well, the Benson was concentrating not so much on the brain, but on the physiological response of the body. As you know, we all have an unconscious body-based nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which has two sides, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is nothing to do with sympathy, misleadingly enough. It's mostly to do with fear. When you're afraid of something, your sympathetic nervous system is activated, adrenaline goes through your bloodstream, your heart beats faster, your blood pressure goes up. And you're in a state where you're ready to fight or run away, the fight or flight reaction. The opposite is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is about not being afraid. And it's only when that system is activated that you can carry out activities that require a relaxation of the body and lack of fear, making love, for example, eating a meal, even going to the lavatory. You can't do these things if you're hyperactivated with the adrenaline system. If you're being chased across a field by an angry bull, your parasympathetic nervous system is fully activated, and good thing it is, it helps you run faster. But the last thing you think of is making love or sitting down to dinner or going to the lavatory. These things are inhibited by the sympathetic nervous system. Now, it's very necessary for us to have that response. But in the modern world, a lot of people spend their time in a state of chronic anxiety. They're afraid almost all the time. They're worried about things, or they're fearful of things that might go wrong, or anxious. And this activates the chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is very bad for health because it leads to elevated blood pressure and stress reactions, high stress hormone levels, and so on. And what Herbert Benson found was that when people meditated, basically for those who were suffering from stress and anxiety, it greatly reduced the activity of the sympathetic nervous system and activated the parasympathetic nervous system. That's called the relaxation response. And as a result of that, one of the effects of meditation is feeling more relaxed, being able to sleep better, and being able to be more effective. The parasympathetic nervous system, that's a very important part of it. But it also protects against depression. It has a protective effect against depression. So meditation has many benefits to changes in brain activity. The main one, when you're meditating, is a reduction in the activity of the default mode network, the part of the connection of areas in the brain that are concerned with worries and ruminations. And it can also lead to long-term anatomical changes.
not very surprising, really, if you're doing particular things with your mind and hence with your brain. Particular regions are going to become more active and the connections get better established between them. The brain is much more plastic than people used to think. We're not surprised if people who do weightlifting develop bigger muscles in their arms. And so it's not that surprising if people who meditate develop new connections in their brains or stronger connections between particular regions of the brain. Now, all this is established by science. The benefits are well known. You can learn meditation all over the world. That's the whole point about these spiritual practices. They're all based on experience. You don't have to start off with a belief system. Most people, we all need belief systems. Everyone has belief systems, but you don't necessarily have to have a spiritual or religious belief system to do these practices. They're about experience and through learning through your own experience. But the reason people meditated traditionally was not so they could be more successful in love and business or sleep better, or it wasn't these secular worldly benefits that people were primarily meditating for. They were meditating because they thought it provided a way of connecting with the ultimate source of consciousness. The Hindus explain this most clearly. In one of the main schools of Hindu philosophy, the idea is that everything in the universe depends ultimately on conscious being, the mind of God, Brahman, and that this ultimate consciousness is the source of everything in the universe. And the ultimate source is conscious. That's the whole point. The ultimate being is a conscious being. And the characteristics of Brahman are threefold: Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat means being, it's conscious being. Chit means consciousness, knowledge. It's to do with names and forms, the contents of consciousness. And Ananda is joy or bliss. And the idea is that the ultimate mind of the universe is complete, not going anywhere, not trying to go anywhere else. And it's utterly blissful. It's in a permanent state of bliss. So the purpose of meditation is to connect our minds with the ultimate mind of the universe. Hindus see all conscious beings as it were, fractal reflections of the divine mind. One of their principal metaphors is of buckets of water, lots of buckets of water, just standing there, and at night reflecting the moon. And in each bucket you see a reflection of the moon. It looks like hundreds or thousands of different moons. But each of those is a reflection of the one moon, which is the source of all these reflections. And in the same way, all our minds are reflections of the ultimate mind and participate in its nature because they're derived from it. So our conscious being is part of the ultimate conscious being. Atman, our individual consciousness, is Brahman. It's linked to it and is part of it. In the Kena Upanishad, it talks about the nature of this ultimate reality. There's a series of verses which get over this point quite clearly. One of them is, not that which is seen by the eyes, but that whereby the eyes can see. Know that alone to be Brahman, the Lord. So it's the ability to see not what's seen. God is not a thing out there that you can study by space probes or scientific observations and quantitative measurements. It's the very ground of consciousness and knowledge itself. Another verse is, not that which is known by the mind, but that whereby the mind can know. Know that alone to be Brahman. Or not that which is heard by the ears, but that whereby the ears can hear. It's the ground of consciousness itself that links us to the ultimate reality. And sometimes teachers of meditation compare the stream of thoughts that goes through our minds when we're meditating to the clouds passing through the sky. And normally you're completely involved in your thoughts, you're involved in your ruminations, you're totally gripped by these fears, anxieties, ruminations, resentments, internal dialogue, and so on. But the meditation, by concentrating on your breathing or sensations in the body, as in mindfulness, or on your mantra, sort of splits your mind and detaches you partially from these thoughts. And then you become aware that your mind is more like the blue sky through which the clouds are passing, the ground of all these thoughts and ideas. And the more you become aware and present in that ground of consciousness, the more you become linked to the ultimate consciousness, to the being on which all consciousness depends. And the more you're linked to that, the more blissful or joyful it is. The spirit, which is the dynamic principle of God, which is the breath, the wind, the flow of life, and is also joy or bliss. St. Augustine, one of the early theologians, thought of the Holy Trinity as the knower, the known, and the joy of knowing. Again, it's sort of the ground of being or knowing as the Father, the Son, or the Logos as the known, or the second person, defined in forms, shapes, connections, meanings, and the joy of the Spirit. So these spiritual practices actually traditionally have been designed to connect us with the ultimate reality. And different practices connect us with different aspects of it. You can find similar parallels to this threefold division in Sufism, and you can find in Buddhism too, there's a threefold classification of the levels of being or consciousness. So the idea is that these practices connect us with the ultimate, but different practices connect us with different aspects of the ultimate, and meditation connects us more with the ground of being, sat, that state of pure consciousness, or the ground of consciousness itself, rather than the contents of consciousness. If you're looking at the beauty of flowers, for example, and you're absorbed in the contemplation of the beauty of these forms, then this is more connecting with chit, names and forms, the contents of consciousness, of divine consciousness, because the idea is that all these forms ultimately reflections of the divine mind. And then if you're engaged in some activity which is very active, which has a spiritual dimension, as many sports do, these are all practical things you can actually do. And they're all things which have measurable effects, which can be studied scientifically. So there's no conflict here between science and spiritual practice. In fact, I think that they mutually reinforce each other, because the scientific studies illuminate these practices and also show us statistically what benefits they can have. And the practices themselves can be helped through the science. I mean, you could meditate more effectively if you know more about the science behind it. Different spiritual practices, which can lead to us feeling more connected with something greater than ourselves. That's what spiritual practices do. And the first chapter is on sports, which many people find surprising, but is, I think, the way in which most people in modern Britain achieve some state of going beyond themselves, so a kind of altered state of consciousness. And one of the things about participating in sports is that it completely shuts down the default mode network, that region of the brain that's to do with the chattering mind, the internal dialogue. Meditation is also about shutting down the default mode network, but sports work faster. You know, if you're, as one friend of mine who's a mountaineer said, you know, by the time he was 50 feet up a rock face, he was completely in the present. So I think sports are one kind of spiritual practice. Many people do them because they feel they get in the flow, you know, in a sense of being part of a flow greater than just themselves. The second practice I discuss is learning from animals. And again, most people don't think of that as a spiritual practice. But one of the points of spiritual practices is coming into the present, as I said, the default mode network, takes us into this constant chattering mind, anxiety, fears, judgments, fantasies, and so on. But animals don't have that problem. If a cat's purring because you're stroking it, it's sitting contentedly on your lap, it's totally in the present. Well, I think it's a common experience that if you come completely into the present, then the only way you can feel the presence of a greater consciousness is in the present. And just being in the present, fully in the present, is for most people a kind of spiritual experience. All mystical experiences are about being completely present. And our normal state of mind is discursive chatter. You know, we're thinking about what we do next or what we ought to have done yesterday and that kind of thing. So there's this constant internal chatter that always takes us away from the present. I once saw a Game Boy advert on the tube and it said, wherever you are, be somewhere else. And, you know, there's the exact opposite of the principle of be here now, which is a key feature of spiritual practices.
Look at that cat. Look at that cat. I'm Anna Breitenbach, and I'm here to invite you to join me on a journey of discovering interspecies communication, which truly is a completely natural skill. It's something we all have within us, as old as the hills themselves and our ancestors who used to live in them. In more modern times, we use quantum science to explain the methodologies behind the energy transference or thought transference that is telepathic communication. However, it's something we absolutely all can do, and it's as much a journey of the mind as it is a journey of the heart, really calling us into true empathy and compassion with our four-legged and two-legged and winged relations. Animals, we get reminded of our own nature and of non-separation. Yes, communication is nothing at all to do with knowledge about a certain species, which could lend us to project onto any individual member of that species some beliefs or generalizations. And that's not appropriate at all. We're dealing with a sentient being after sentient being after sentient being when we're dealing with individuals. And so it behooves me to constantly be looking at who I am in that equation. Because if I'm to know the truth and the real thoughts, feelings, what's moving for that other, I need to be a clean slate and as neutral as possible on the inside. Because I'm not trying to, be anything or be in an elevated state. It's just about dropping and dropping. But I do get that feedback when I have people around me and in nature or in front of an animal and connecting. I get that feedback afterwards. But during the time of the communication, I am largely unaware of self. Like really, I don't know. The persona drops away and my ego-based identity takes a little bit of the background. And the inner narration and the dialogue, the internal critic that's going is just background noise. I don't bother trying to push that away because, as Carl Jung rightly said, what we resist persists. So I don't bother to give my attention and my focus to those thoughts that I'm finding unhelpful. Instead, I just stay with the moment and stay with the moment. And the best way I know how to do that from my animal communication mentors is mindful breathing. Just simply watching my natural breathing rhythm, seeing as the mind insists on being busy with something. May as well just tell it to run along and watch the breathing, which presumably I'm doing anyway. Mm-hmm.
What is the default mode network? The default mode network refers to an interconnected group of brain regions that are associated with introspective functions, internally directed thought, such as self-reflection and self-criticism. Increased activity of the default mode network is correlated with the experience of mind wandering and our capacity to imagine mental states in others, i.e., theory of mind, as well as our ability to mentally time travel, projecting ourselves into the past or the future. But yeah, you can also start to constantly worry feel anxious, and then you feel also stressed from all that thinking, especially if you had an upbringing that wasn't so beneficial and rather traumatic. Then the concept of that ego persona is rather negative, and this then will generate a rather negative brain chatter, right? And what a relief it can be when you can zoom out of that and just have peace and inner silence, no brain chatter at all. So the functioning connections that make up the DMN increase from birth to adulthood, unfortunately. Yeah, and that's why we are in this mess. With the DMN not being fully active until later in a child's development, emerging around the age of 5 as the child develops a stable sense of narrative self. It's a narrative or ego, right? As we mature, we learn to respond to life stimuli in a patterned way, according to that. Developing habitual pathways of communication between brain regions, particularly those of the default mode network. Over time, communication becomes confined to specific pathways, meaning that our brain becomes more constrained as we develop. It is these constrained paths of communication between brain regions that quite literally come to constitute our default mode of operating in the world, coloring the way we perceive reality. You get it? So, again, it's really important to zoom out of this perceived reality on a daily basis as a spiritual practice. What you can also do is not maybe regularly, but from time to time, work with certain substances that help you to zoom out of this perceived reality ego persona state. Psychedelics and the default mode network. How do psychedelics affect the default mode network? Psychiatric doctor and ayahuasca researcher Simon Raffel likens the effects of psychedelics on the DMN to defragmenting a computer. When you ingest a psychedelic, activity of the default mode network is significantly decreased. So again, you have less or even no brain chatter, total silence, and it's such a relief. Whilst connectivity in the rest of the brain increases, and why it's so beneficial for healing trauma. Brain imaging studies suggest that when psychedelics are absorbed, they decrease activity in the default mode network. As a result, the sense of self appears to be temporarily shut down, so don't freak out. It's temporarily, okay? And then when the effects of any substance wear off, then you zoom back in to that default mode network perception. So it's really nothing to be scared of. this ego dissolution is really just temporary. Due to psychedelics' ability to disrupt the activity of the default mode network, they have a particularly strong therapeutic potential when it comes to changing negative thought patterns. For example, a study by Imperial College London assessed the impact of psilocybin-assisted therapy on 12 patients with severe depression. Results demonstrated that psilocybin-assisted therapy was able to dramatically reduce their depression scores for a period of up to 3 months. It's like a reset, and that's wonderful. Matthew Brown gave an analogy for how psychedelics are able to reset the default mode network, enabling an increased sense of psychological flexibility. If you do the same thing repeatedly, it is like you are walking down the same path all the time. Naturally, that path becomes very well worn and easy to walk down. However, you realize that maybe there is another path that might be more advantageous for you, and you want to try walking down that path. Psychedelics mow and lawn so that it doesn't seem that the weeds are quite so high, and you can walk down that new path a little bit more easily. And from that you can get new insights, obviously. In a state of ego dissolution, these boundaries that you normally have are let down, and a great zooming out, as I said, and have experienced, takes place, where you begin to see things on a macroscopic level. You are no longer an individual isolated from life. That is very important, as it takes place around you, but rather you are interconnected with everything through the web of life. It is not a logical, but rather a felt experience of incredible love and reconnection. And that's why I believe this is happening inside the heart consciousness, which can be accessed through daily practice with deep breathing and focus on the heart chakra center. It's super easy, and if you do that for 5 minutes daily, morning or evening, or both, I'm sure you will notice a difference. When asked about the therapeutic implications of having an experience like ego dissolution, Matthew Brown explained that it can be tremendously healing indeed, absolutely, as our consciousness is able to extend itself beyond the confines of our individual experience and become one. That's again heart consciousness with nature's larger whole. You can feel unconditionally loved from within, and you just melt in gratitude. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And this can happen spontaneously, just you sitting somewhere in nature, relaxing a bit, breathing deeply, and suddenly you switch out of that ego and into this heart consciousness. And oh my gosh, it's such a relief to let go of that brain chatter and just be, at least for a moment. It is so liberating, and I keep saying it's like taking a vacation from life. That's how it feels like, a true vacation. Because it's so recharging, so nourishing. In the flow state, when the default mode network is deactivated, the sensation I had, what I experienced, was like a feeling of zooming out and going through some kind of a barrier where music was distorted, and that lasted for a few seconds, and then I was somewhere in the middle. That was the sensation, the in-between space. Maybe that was here, I don't know. But the sensation was ego was silenced, no brain chatter. It was just wonderful. Entropic brain theory and the reducing valve. Psychedelics tend to disrupt the activity of the default mode network temporarily, disintegrating the highly organized system of networks that it is made up of, allowing for less ordered neurodynamics and a greater degree of entropy within the brain. That is to say, that open, freer conversations begin to take place between brain regions that are normally kept separate. According to the entropic brain theory, the state of consciousness associated with psychedelics is comparable of that which exists in early childhood. We experience awe and wonder, looking at everything in the world around us as wholly novel. These findings are in line with writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley's earlier reflections of the psychedelic experience, in which he described psychedelic consciousness as mind at large, in that it grants us access to a larger set of brain functions, allowing us to tap into an unbounded state of consciousness, which extends beyond the individual and into the collective. He theorized that in order to make biological survival possible, mind at large consciousness has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system, meaning that it comes in dropwise instead of flooding us with information. But for some people, this very reducing valve is not so reducing, so they receive more information on a daily basis, and it's a natural state for them.
Phenomena happening. Why are his mind and my mind completely connected? Telepathy is the tip of the iceberg with their spiritual gifts.
People don't understand that they can do this. They don't even have to be in the same room, the same zip code.
But is telepathy how we're meant to communicate?
That's what he had explained in the past.
What did he say?
He had said that in my world, people don't talk. People just close their eyes and that's how we communicate.
In his world, they don't talk, but they still communicate. What do you think he meant by that?
So once he came home and he was upset, and I typed with him. So I said, okay, why are you upset? And he said that I am telling hi to the person, but the person is not replying me back.
Okay, wait. So Akil is saying hi with his mind, but the other child isn't responding to him because he didn't say it out loud.
Yes. So he thinks, why do I have to use my mouth and my body to answer the question when I'm answering in my mind. He doesn't get it.
And he thinks everyone should be using telepathy.
Yeah, he literally tells me that teach people how to read my mind. And I said, I cannot. He said, I have to read people's mind.
Despite that, I was confused because Akil said, in my world, this is how we communicate. And I just kept wondering, well, who is the we? Communication takes two people doing something back and forth. And what I've learned from talking to so many spellers is they do not misspeak. The words they choose are precise and thoughtful, often poetic. So who is the we in his world that he's referring to? One of the things Manisha continually says is that this is not sheer telepathy. The second information enters her mind, it goes into his mind. She says it's like they share a consciousness, and sometimes she's not sure if a thought is hers, or his, or theirs together. I would love to get your take on the random picture generator. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, that was cool. Yeah, there were moments where he's interpreting images differently than we are. But then once he says it or he does it and you look at it and it makes sense, you can tell that he's thinking about these things as a metaphor.
One of the things that Manisha said to me early on was it's not just sheer telepathy. It's almost like sharing of a consciousness. And she's like, I don't know what that means. Does it mean consciousness is coming to us from somewhere else and we're both tapping into the same like signal? Or what? And so that was the thing for me watching the random picture generator. It's like, okay, if it's possible, like that my phone can send you a text or my phone can send you a picture, why couldn't that happen with the brain? Maybe she's sending him a word or a number or a picture, right? But then when it came to like looking at a random picture, like you said, having to interpret this metaphorically, then I was like, she doesn't know what she's even sending him because she doesn't even know what she's looking at sometimes. So what does this mean? Is he looking through her eyes? Like
Well,
that's to me.
Yeah, that's the difference is like, is he just using her eyes as an instrument, like you said? The idea that like he sees something or he's interpreting something that she's not even interpreting is more just like he's bypassing her brain and just using her eye.
All parents have instinct. They absolutely have instinct. And that usually only comes into the foreground when your child is in danger or something really apparently serious or potentially dangerous is at play. But we as adults have simply forgotten how to have our instinct be in the foreground the whole time, how to have intuition be in the foreground. Children under the age of 2, before they learn to name and objectify the world and in so doing cut up and make into little compartments reality. Children, before they reach the age of 2 and begin to objectify and name things, they perceive the world directly through their intuition. And they know and feel everything. They can sense the energy of a person or an animal walking into a room. And so all non-humans and very, very young humans are intrinsically in this state, and they respond to each other in that way. Animals and babies in particular, and young children, really directly perceive the world through their intuition in these energetic ways. And it's quite a journey for young kids, quite a confusing journey and sometimes an emotionally painful one when they are told by us adults, by parents and teachers and other so-called responsible people, that what they, the child, is experiencing isn't real. Don't be silly. You can't tell what Fido is thinking because dogs don't talk. Don't be silly. You're not seeing that fairy in the garden, or plants don't have feelings. And it's a great moment of grief as the child begins to learn and slowly come to believe that the world is comprised of a bunch of separate things without this rich dynamic relationship and communication happening the whole time between the different species. And I think as parents, as adults in this life, even if we don't have our own biological children, we all come across children. The best thing we can do as an adult is encourage a child's intuition, even if we can be just that one adult in the child's life who listens when they tell a story about something that seems imaginary or for which there doesn't seem to be physical proof. Because all the child needs is one example of one adult who's not going to say, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's not real.
Yeah.
All of us talk to each other. It's called the Talk on the Hill. It's called the Talk on the Hill. They all talk to each other. Think of it like a channel. Like they all turn to this channel at a certain time and they all communicate.
And they don't have to be in the same room at all?
They don't have to be in the same zip code.
This felt like an astounding breakthrough in the unraveling mystery of telepathy that was starting to consume my life. It might be more of a merging of a consciousness. I also asked Manisha what she wants most for Akil. Though telepathy is a fascinating and perplexing development in her life, and she definitely wants answers, she's got much heavier and bigger concerns.
The kids like Akil should be accepted, and instead of trying to fix them, see what their capabilities are, what their skills are, and work on the strengths. Everybody is busy either trying to understand them, research them, make judgments about them, and trying to get them to come in our world and do things what we do.
And this is the crux of everything. Non-speakers have been judged by their behaviors for decades. Schools, doctors, really, society at large, makes judgments on what their body is doing. But this isn't an accurate reflection of their intelligence. It's a beguiling trap. How does society celebrate neurodiversity when we do little to fit them into our world?
Like the blanket which he has. Can he take the blanket all over the place? No, the teachers think that's not appropriate and he should not. But this is house, we cannot take the blanket away from him. So there has to be an agreement and a mutual understanding between both the worlds. And both the worlds and both the community have to bring into a balance.
Akil operates best when he has a blanket around him. Why can't we allow this in schools or a workplace?
If they need to be touched, they need to be touched. Mm-hmm.
Many non-speakers feel more grounded and better able to regulate their bodies when they're being touched. But when it comes to communicating via spelling, so often their words are discounted as not even being their own if they aren't typing independently into a keyboard. And it took Akil years to get to that point. And some people never do. Should their words and thoughts be discounted along the way because of this? And another way we're not meeting them, or even trying, is by not looking into this. The idea that non-speakers might have abilities with their minds that the rest of us have either forgotten how to use or just simply can't access. Have you ever asked him, does he see through your eyes, or does he just know what's in your mind?
It's just automatic. He gets it automatically at that time.
John Keats, the poet, once said that Isaac Newton was destroying the poetry and wonder of the rainbow by reducing it to just being a prism of colors. In fact, it's not abnormal for scientific breakthroughs to be met with skepticism. That happened to Galileo when he proposed that the sun and not the earth was the center of our universe. It happened to Gregor Mendel when he proposed his theory of genetics. Many scientific breakthroughs that are rejected or ignored by academics and the public when introduced eventually become accepted as empirical truths about our world.
But I saw these things with my eyes and I believe that they're happening. So now what I'm thinking about is not whether it's happening, but what's the explanation for it.
When he was saying this, it made me think of this Nikola Tesla quote. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence.
Actually the right way to eat a cinnamon roll. We start by unraveling it from the center and...
That is not the correct way to eat a cinnamon roll. That is not the way you're supposed to do it. That is some false ass information about the cinnamon roll, and I don't appreciate it. You're gonna have all these goofy ass children walking around eating the cinnamon rolls the wrong way. That is not correct information. You're supposed to eat the cinnamon roll right there. What the hell wrong with you?